I'd like to call the meeting to order. Second.
Right.
Okay. And so the first thing on the agenda is to discuss the minutes of July 2nd, which was our,
July 20th. And sorry, July 2nd and June 20th.
yeah, so I wasn't, okay, so the June 20th are also draft. I thought they were approved. Okay.
No, these are both draft.
Okay, so any comments?
Have we got any comments from either Kara or
We
Max?
We will distrust, no, the answer to that is no, and we will just, that will be the next point of business. So that's on the record also. We briefly discussed it before, so.
Anybody
Okay.
have any problems with the minutes?
No, I thought they captured the discussion
Okay.
pretty well.
So, good. So I vote to accept both the minutes of June 20th and July 2nd. Can I have a second?
A second.
Okay, anyone opposed? No, okay, thank you. Next thing of business, on Wednesday, the 15th, Paul from the select board, Pam and myself met with Kara. We hadn't heard from her for a while. It was represented to us that there was staffing issues within the EPA. So basically anything that we had done since, I'm going to say July 1st, I don't know exactly, approximately July 1st, hadn't been reviewed. They are catching up at the moment. So therefore, to answer your question regarding our comments on, I don't know if it was both, but on definitely on the items on the construction quality assurance plan that had not been reviewed or shared. The Maximus has continued working on what they've been working on. Kara was going to be meeting with him on that day after we met with her briefly for about 40 minutes at the Dunkin' Donuts near the site. She will update us on the schedule after she gets through some other items on her list, including talking to them. And we'll have a better feeling of what the timing is. That being said, it is pretty apparent, at least in my mind from the conversation, that they are clearly not going to be starting in March like we hoped because of the timing to get these other documents through the process. Maybe something miracle will happen, but I sort of doubt it. I asked the question regarding could they do half next year on the basin enclosure in the second half the second year. She did not think so, but she's going to get clarification on it. You know, if it's possible to put the cement around, not the cover, and do that later, that may be a possibility, but that's more to follow on that. So therefore, when we get more information, we'll be sharing on that issue.
The public meeting.
So therefore, on the public meeting, which would have been discussed about occurring between November and March, the focus, if there is a public meeting, will likely change. It may include the basin, but it would also include other things that they're doing there because they are continuing to work on it. So therefore, more to follow on that also.
That definitely won't happen in 2025.
Yeah, it'd be not November, December. It'd be February, March, whatever timeframe likely. So is there anything that Paul or Pam would like to add that I did not capture? I mean, we talked a little bit about communication, but that's partly why Paul's here. So therefore, I'll defer to him in a moment. So
I thought that this comment that if they can't get documents reviewed fast enough, they won't be able to meet their March start date of 2026 is something that functionally our quick response to comments would help if in fact they do try to push that, because they may well try to push that to happen a lot faster.
It is sort of tying into that. I did ask that if she could give us a heads up on potential timing on other documents so that we can adjust our schedules. As you know, we did meet on July, whatever it was, second to get those comments back by July 7th. Willing to do that again, but likewise, more than 10 days or whatever days, notice that we had to do that so we can meet the rules likewise of an open meeting and properly posting those dates.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing I'd add, we asked
Which
about fund-
documents are being delayed?
And so David, basically the documents that were delayed was, and I'm unclear, clearly the remedial design construction quality assurance plan was delayed. And then likewise, I'm not sure exactly where in the process the 95% holding basin remedial design was when this occurred. So
Thank you.
as soon as we get more from Kara, I will share that information with everybody on the committee. I think I can do that.
Yeah.
Even not in a meeting, so.
The other thing we asked about funding concerns. I mean, Superfund has always been sort of a high priority in the Trump administrations, and so there's no funding issues here. The hiatus was, I'll call it more a political pause than a funding pause. It hasn't affected work at the site other than the reviews that you're talking about here. She did mention one thing, which we should follow up on. And it seems that if there's a delay, they're going to accelerate the work. And she mentioned something, well, they might be working to midnight. I don't know if she was being flippant about that or factual about that.
I wasn't sure if that was always in the plan, the way she said it, but likewise, that was why she wanted to have a meeting with the public before that occurred. And
Right.
we did have a discussion about timings of meetings and, how far out versus when the work was occur. And I sort of, excuse me for a second. I don't want this thing to reboot. I sort of was flipping on, the National Grid thing being, people upset that they weren't hearing about it until like just before it was gonna occur versus getting, there's a group that wants it a lot of times ahead and a lot of people like to also hear it close. And so therefore the balance of those two. So.
Yeah, of course, I think there'd be a lot of neighborhood.
Yeah.
A lot of neighborhood concern.
Right. So.
Right.
The cost structure for that, I think, would be fairly significant too, but
Yeah.
they're paying. That's
Right.
their choice, I guess.
I don't, but having lights and noise.
Right. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
neighborhood right there
Yeah,
on
so-
both sides, so.
Yeah,
And,
it's loud work.
Yeah, just something to keep it on.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll have a public meeting before that.
right.
occurs,
So, and likewise, the construction plan hopefully will provide more information when we get closer that we have to review. And we can note that as a question when we go through to make sure if it doesn't ask a question, doesn't indicate anything about that, that would be a question to ask when we review those documents.
So we've never seen a preliminary construction schedule as of this time, just out of curiosity.
Whatever, I don't recall. I've only seen stuff saying March. I might have missed it in the
Yeah,
documents that we've
yeah,
reviewed, but whatever I've seen related to that, you've also seen.
Yeah.
So therefore, no, I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, I just don't know how relevant the March date is, if it's a 4-month process or a 10-month process.
Yeah.
I just don't.
I thought that was a long process.
Yeah.
I mean, really, so if it's delayed, it'll either be March in 2026 or it'll be March in 2027.
And we, unofficial comment response to this, but we also raised the thing about people observing.
Yeah,
And Kara made a comment, I'm putting words in her mouth. Not likely, basically, they're talking about having to have a second trailer for leaving clothing and stuff. So more on the radioactive type side of, and the big construction activity that, who would be allowed to get how close and where the things are. So, but we did ask that question before in the comments and
Yeah, I kind of heard that as a polite no.
yeah. And I made it clear, it was a request, we understood that, but yeah, so it's yeah.
She kind of implied that this would be a large sort of contaminated zone that was.
Yeah.
Where you would change in and out of and you wouldn't, but that she might not even be going in and out of that
Well, then-
regularly,
Yeah,
so.
Then all the more reason for clarification on the QAO, you know. Kind of process that was
Yeah.
raised in the notes as well.
So,
You know, on the timing issue, just sort of related to other aspects here. We've been telling the town, we've talked to the select board, telling outside council that the site would probably be finished in 2029 and probably turned over to an owner in 2030 roughly. If that's gonna be significantly delayed, I would like to hear that from
Yeah.
EPA. Just for planning purposes.
yeah,
She pointed out that they were working, they would still had still done a lot of soil work and that a lot of the soil work was kind of getting done. There would still be a, holding basin, the exterior of the holding basin, the amendments added to the soil, basically down gradient. After the holding basin goes in, but a lot of work could get still done overlapping while they're waiting to get the holding basin
it
done if it
right.
gets delayed.
The amendments in the holy basin, it's done.
Are done.
All that
yeah,
Pokey drilling.
so, I think after her meeting up this past Wednesday with them, she'll have a better feel of timing, but it was my understanding they would continue working and yes, this will delay at least the holding basin, but may not
Delay the whole project.
delay the whole project, but you know, what in at least my mind, the higher priority item will be delayed, but other things that needs to get to the finish line won't. So therefore, the Gantt chart or whatever will change which items are being done when, but the
Is
But-
there currently being soil removed from the site? Is there truck traffic going back and forth?
I'm not aware of any traffic of removal of soil. We did ask the question regarding the soil on, correct me, guy,
1440.
1440 Main Street, if any of that was being delivered there. She was gonna check on that. You know, there's two types of soil at 1440 and, my comment was, I've seen trucks go by from 1440 going past 229 Main Street, so clearly not all the soil is going there, but I don't know if any is, so.
1440 is that if you're driving west on 62 toward Maynard, is that the development on the right-hand
At
side?
the right-hand side, that there's nothing but dirt
You
now,
can't miss
Right.
it. You can't.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's
you do
been
double take.
denuded, yeah.
Dirt does it.
except for that little branch, that little group of trees that are in a fenced-in area that are raised 10 feet above the rest of the ground, but yeah.
So that's conceivably where they could get their soil as they. if they-
That was an issue raised initially at one point, and that was one of our questions on Wednesday. Do we know if any is being taken from there?
So
So,
I'm not sure, but I think the soil removal is done at that side. It seems pretty graded.
yeah,
So I don't
or
know.
if it was done, that's
Yeah,
more,
I
yeah,
think
so,
it's maybe past tense.
yeah, so. But that would be likewise, that was the Maximus versus the EPA that was interacting in that, so therefore, hopefully if something, if the opportunity was not lost, if it was actually achievable, so.
I'll have to say that I don't believe Carol was so negative as to imply that we would definitely miss that March
Okay,
window. I felt like she was gonna try to turn it around. We're looking at administrative hurdles of approval of documents,
Yeah.
and the 95% is really close to the 100%
Yeah.
for a good reason.
yeah, so. We'll see, yeah, so I'll reach out to her next week to see if she's got any more updates.
Is the government still shut down? Or did they take a vote to?
It is still
reopen?
shut down, it's,
How does that impact us?
it's hard to say, I'm basing it on partly of my position, what I'm doing for my thing, which is Department of Defense. You know, that all the government people that I'm working with are working but not getting paid. But then travel, depending on where you are, may be prevented. Likewise, there's discussions regarding things changing as you go along. So therefore, organizations that I know of that, because of the method they're paid, we're still getting paid, that may get cut off, and then they would transition type things. So therefore, unless anybody else has a better comment, it's up in the air. I mean,
Well, Kara's working.
yeah, Kara is working but not getting paid. So I mean,
I just hear these reports on the news media about massive layoffs.
yeah, so I mean, I've heard that too. So therefore, that's why I cannot comment one way or the other because I don't know enough information. People are currently working, so at this point, as of Wednesday, there's nothing, it wasn't delaying us, but that could have changed yesterday for all.
Yeah, remember, there's so many different parts of EPA, and I think the Superfund part is. I
Yeah.
understand it's not effective. There may be other EPA parts
So, yeah.
that are effective.
These particular parts of, I mean, our particular program is a moneymaker for EPA.
Right.
They're
Superfund
collecting
the money.
more in overhead
Yeah.
than they're spending
Yeah.
in the oversight.
Yeah. So.
Good point.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the discussion of risk communication, and I'll ask to join us to have this discussion. David, thank you for joining us. I hope you're doing well.
Sorry, I
Thank-
can't drive yet, and I'd be there in person otherwise, but I'm still limited to not being able to drive.
Is your
Okay,
home?
I'm sorry, yeah, home, yeah.
so thank you for attending. My understanding from your being on the other committee, along with Pam and Paul, you have some background in this, so.
Yeah, let me just kind of tee this up. So when the advisory committee submitted the report and made the recommendations, the select board, there were really three general paths. There was the legal path. I'll just update you. So town council is working on the legal path with EPA and DOJ. That's kind of in progress right now. The planning path is somewhat part of the land use working group activity. 2229 is part of the potential sites. But I can't say it's specific planning for 2229 Main Street. In fact, since a lot of the focus on the land use group is really fire, police, public works, and potential municipal consolidation, the sense right now is the only possible use for 2229 in that regard would be municipal consolidation if there was a building built there. Way in the future, hypothetical, probably unlikely. So I think any kind of formal planning for 2229 is yet to be really engaged. So MCI Concord is deep into the planning. At some point, we're going to be planning for 2229, whether it's part of this land use group or something else, I'm not sure. But that was the second path. The third path we recommended was the risk communication path. And so there's lots of different aspects of risk of and when the public comments on risk, they combine, I guess, financial risk and liability for the town versus human health and ecological. What I'm talking about here is sort of the health and ecological part of the risk. The liability part is part of the legal discussion. So I just kind of want to clarify that. Not that the legal risk might come up during conversations, but my thought here in meeting with the group here is that David wrote that chapter, whatever it is, the second part of that as a sort of, I'll call it risk communication framework. It wasn't a plan because we wanted to advise the select board, that at some point we need to engage the public in what the site is going to look like when it's done. A lot of the public right now still thinks about the site as it existed in the past, and I and others still get comments on why do you do anything in a radioactive site? I've never walked it. I mean, it's still out there. I think it's a important minority that still has concerns, but we have to address those concerns. And so the timing here, what I want to, since EPA is planning a public meeting in the spring, the opportunity for piggybacking, so the initial risk discussion, and I'm looking to this group and to David in particular, sort of planning this out. This is not a one-shot deal. This is not a one meeting deal. If you look at the plan that David, it's sort of getting the public on the site, giving them facts, talking about the site in the future. And so and those that framework is laid out by David in there. So how to sort of activate that framework and the time frame for doing that. I think starting sooner than later, because it's probably going to take several different meetings and several different versions to get the public feel comfortable, if not energized, if not very positive about the site. And part of the risk communication, I think, one of the audiences, although it's not are developers, the housing people in town. There's affordable housing and housing, whether or not this is a good site for housing. I know there's some aspects of the site that would be great for housing, especially the pieces that were never contaminated. There may be other, and we've heard from Minuteman Arc that they might be interested right across the border doing some housing there. So housing is not nothing's off the table. In fact, as far as reuse of the site. And the conceptual plans for this first appeared in the reuse committee, right? There's conceptual different scenarios, and then was taken forward into the advisory. So they're kind of general plans for what could be done at the site. As far as where that could be done at the site, so that's the next phase, and so planning and risk are going to go hand in hand at some point, but not now. So if I'm being fuzzy about this, it's only because I want you guys to start thinking about this and how to take the knowledge that we have about the cleanup, about the risk that was done, about the data that EPA is generating. What was very useful in the risk assessment piece of this report was that EPA handed us data in areas that have been cleaned up and signed off. And they gave us chemical data on the soil to demonstrate that those cleanup goals were being met. That was a really important part of the risk chapter. Now, since this report in 2024, I'm sure EPA has additional data of areas that they have deemed cleaned and filled. So I think getting you guys requesting that soil data for cleaned up areas would add to the real factual data, not the potential data on paper, but the real data for that EPA is meeting their goals, meeting the cleanup goals. Because that was one of the concerns of the public. How do we know that EPA is going to get this done? So there's some real data out there which shows, yeah, they're doing what they said they're going to do. So that the data part of the risk communication piece, I think, is important as well. So I just kind of want to frame that up because I think it's this is the only committee that could take that on. I think David is probably the best equipped to because he thought a lot about that. So I'll kind of leave it there and just get open up for discussion. But I think that the select board, I as representative of the select board, and your liaison would like you to start thinking about this.
Well, question, along with the data that you received, are there good graphics that go along with that, I assume? Because that's gonna be an important element for the public, right? I mean, a graphic is.
Oh, they could, they're maps.
Great.
They're
Yeah.
Concentration contours.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of stuff. And then they have a lot more data now than they did in 2024 to add to that. The data that they had was not in every part of the site because they were still working in certain areas, but they've been doing a lot of digging and filling. And so I would think they have a lot more data that covers a lot more parts of the site, not the holding basin.
Yeah.
And I think you guys are going to need to put the holding basin in context of the whole site. Because when I hear people talk about radioactive material and contamination being left at the site, yeah, it's going to be deep in the holy basin and
90
sequestered.
feet below.
So, but, you know, need to kind of put that issue in context of the rest of the site. So context is really important for the site. And then you have the natural resource part of the site, which I think we all need to emphasize, because I know the NRC has been interested in that for a while. That hasn't changed much. There's a little cleanup going on in the corner of the bog. But so anyway, it's a complex site, and probably the risk communication is not an easy thing to do.
So I'm gonna point out that if there is an exclusion zone that is this work area for the holding basin, that is going to look awkward while that is in place, that we might want to really front load visits and information between now and March, in case they really do start work then, because it will be easier to tour the site during those times.
I agree, before or after
After,
that.
yeah.
And,
Okay.
and you know, I think carefully arranged public visits, maybe before and after the holy basin. Because, you know, the town is not going to take ownership. If we take ownership of the site, which I think is likely, but not definite, that's probably not going to happen until for a few years. So there's time in between now and then for we don't want to say, hey, the town has decided to take the site and have the public say, well, we weren't involved. So involving the public. Now, as far as the decision on acquisition of the site, that hasn't been made. There's discussions are just underway. There will likely be a hearing on that. There may not be a town meeting, because Article 2015, the town authorized the select board to acquire the site. But I still think that everybody thinks that if and when that decision is made, there's going to be a hearing. When that hearing, it's, you know, several years away from that hearing. So we want to make sure the public's involved in every piece of this.
Couple questions, and it's been a while since I looked at the whole thing. Additional data you guys have, and is there a repository of it, or? I mean, I know there's a whole bunch of references at the end of it or somewhere in there, and I haven't gone and looked at those references, so therefore, is that where all potential data is, or is there other stuff that you guys had that wasn't potentially linked in that document? I'd ask you or David or Pam, likely, since you were on that committee.
So I don't really
There is a
know.
good question. We have the data.
Yeah.
Whether they're in a town repository.
Whether it's in a position, well, so if the data would be in the EPA repository, we might want to start downloading some of the EPA repository stuff in case that those public documents become unavailable.
The town's contractor, Rue Associates, could definitely have all the data. That gives.
But they only had the data from when they did their work.
Right. I mean, the news, we don't.
No, I understand. I'm just but more Pam with what we have, so therefore.
Yeah.
You three have done it. You guys know what you're doing. I'm coming in new type thing, you know. What, you know, and we have you three to keep asking, but likewise, what should we be asking the EPA? What do we think they have to, you produced this before, so therefore, likewise, if it's not per se in the document, helping us think about that as we go through the process. And then the second question relates to, you talked about meetings. Initially, my thought is a bunch of internal meetings open town meetings, but versus meetings totally to the public, where we go through a process initially coming up with this information or how we want to present it. And then we present it. Is that your thought process? And when do you think?
I'm turning it over to your.
Okay,
so I haven't figured out the best way to do it.
Okay, so
your question on where the data are, as I sit here, unless I totally blanked in this, we have the data. The contractor has the old data.
Yeah.
So you need to make that available, Pam. Tell where that is. When we close the project.
So that risk, the human health risk assessment that they did is in fact on our website, but I don't know where all the data that they use is supporting for that.
Report.
Right.
The report is a big report.
Right.
And,
And that whole report is still linked on the town's website. We have a PDF of that
Okay.
isn't going away when some government decides.
the electronic
set up
version
that.
of the data, I don't.
Okay.
Probably Rue has that, we may want. Chris Carmody is no longer with the town. So we're gonna have to ask somebody to ask Rue, or we could ask directly.
Well, Megan's still.
Megan can ask
Okay,
for the electronic version of the old data.
Yeah.
And Kara you could ask her to combine the old data. She knows what EPA and Bruce gave
yep.
the
So, okay.
committee, they had the new data too.
So it sounds to me like, in fact, doing some regular processing updating of the data at the site from EPA might be a valuable thing. In other words, we would want basically what percentage of the work has been done, how much material has been removed, what are the stats on the areas that have been closed out and remediated. So, you know, does that make sense? Those
It
kinds of
does,
things would
I'm
be.
thinking, so when EPA has their public meeting, it almost sounds like they need to talk about the closeout and what they've done and stuff, but we need to take that information into the risk communication.
Right, yeah.
part of it, because they're not going to spend any time, I don't think. on risk
But if we
communication.
ask them to spend a little time, then in other words, we'd like updates that say
So-
this, and that would be something that we can be regularly writing a letter to the bridge to say, EPA's let us know that this much work has been done. And that's a way to get people sense
Yeah.
so that they have a sense of how it's going, or is that something you think might be valuable? Or
Well-
David, is that something you think might be valuable?
Minimally, because the bridge, so you have to think of risk communication in terms of the relationships with people who have the deepest concern. So Paul said wisely, and we've said this in our summary suggestions to the select board, there are various audiences. There's not just one audience. So the
Okay.
people, Paul, that you're referring to, I don't know who they are, who continue to raise concerns, they need to be specifically identified as an audience of high concern. The bridge is not the best way to deal with that audience. That audience needs to be dealt with in a personal way. And the recommendations we made to the selectmen also say this, that, and now would be a fine time to start in on that. Well, various people in town on this project have been working on it for 20 years. Personal relationships with the people with the deepest concern to build trust, not just to convey information, to build trust so that the information that we then do convey carries sufficient weight. And I'll give you one tiny example of that. So there was a public meeting, I forget exactly when, and a woman who had raised a lot of concerns, I forget her name, short kind of woman, asks a lot of questions in the meetings, kept asking about radioactivity. And you guys have bandied about this word again today. And I said, and Bruce, who was also there, confirmed that radioactivity is no longer the health threat, even in the basin. That the basin contains material that is a toxin, if ingested, what is it, liver, I forget what it's, kidneys, whatever, the DU, is sufficiently low in radioactivity so that the health threat there is basically not radioactivity anymore, it's internal toxin. And the point I'm making here is twofold. We need to make sure that that gets stressed. The radioactivity gets raised all the time. It's a built-in boogeyman that everybody has burned into their mental image of this place. But that is no longer, according to the experts there, not me, the health risk from the DU stuff that's left. First. Second of all, what I was raising as an example is this woman at this meeting, we were able to have a conversation with her in the public meeting. Maybe you remember her, Paul.
Yes, Mary Weinberg.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you very much.
She has very thoughtful comments and.
Yeah. And she seemed reasonably, my sense was that she felt that her concerns had been directly, respectfully addressed at that meeting, specifically the radioactivity. And I only raise that as an example of what I think needs to happen at the moment. The general town concern, I'm only tangentially now really involved in this. Paul, you probably are much more central to hearing things from folks. But my general sense is that the general town is not all up in arms about this, but the core of folks who raise these concerns to you continue to be. So the risk communication activity that I think is probably appropriate at this point, and Pam suggested it as well, is various steps that we can take to build relationships with the people who still have the serious or hot or whatever word you want to use concerns, so that we can build trust, so that, like Ms. Weinberg felt, so that they feel like they're being responsibly and respectfully dealt with, because the data will speak for itself. The facts of the site and the health risks of the site are now pretty minimal, not zero, but pretty minimal. So my concrete suggestion, this is taking too long. My concrete suggestion is to identify who those people are. And I made this suggestion in the select board recommendations. Identify that particular audience, those group of people, and designate people like Pam or Paul or me or people representing the town to have conversations with these people, just conversations about their concerns, to let them feel heard, to give them what information we have. And then further steps can be like in March when the construction starts up toward the holding basin, visits. But for these people in particular, this is a particular audience that I think is the only one of real high level remaining concern. So there are a lot of steps that can be taken now. Relationship building through people with the people who have to reach out on our behalf are people more like Pam and you, Paul. I can help. I'm glad to do whatever you want, but I don't have as much standing as you guys do. People with standing who can build these relationships more effectively than. That's the most important thing, the standing, the showing of respect. We're the people who are really leading the work on this project want to hear you and take your concerns seriously. So that'd be a first step. Identify those audiences and arrange those kind of conversations.
So the identify of the audiences, you're noting the people who made negative comments at the meeting as one. I was going to say that another audience we have is people who work for the DPW, people who work in Concord are not happy with the idea of potentially being relocated to that site because they are still concerned about it.
Well,
this is something that I've heard anecdotally.
Logistics and location are more of a concern than, and
no, that's not what I've heard, that they're concerned about what is there, and that's an audience that we might reach out to. Concord staff are, we are cutting budgets, cutting people. A lot of people are working understaffed in a lot of areas. There's a lot of disgruntled sort of undertone of things, not terribly, but this is one more thing that saying that we take them seriously might be a valuable thing to do. So
yeah, and I agree with all that. It's kind of a balance. And I think what I think David's describing, I'll call it, and I thought about this, the ambassador part of it. I think individuals such as Pam and probably not myself, but others should be ambassadors to various groups and to meet with them informally. We kind of did that in the select board when the anti-Semitism issue came up. The first thing we did is let's talk, each of the select board, let's talk to various committees and groups. So I think that is an important thing, the one-on-one with individuals or the one-on-one with committees. The housing committees, the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, Keith Bergman, and the other housing committees, whether or not there's going to be housing there, they have to we want them to be ambassadors as well, but we don't want people to speaking, is the word unfactually about, what's there. And I kind of heard that as terms of what's, the residual contaminants.
And I want to thank Dave for correcting me for that statement. I mean, Kara never really said why they were gonna have to boot on and boot off type stuff, so therefore, we gotta make sure we don't make.
Yeah, but I'm talking about what the
Yeah.
site's going to be when it grows.
Yeah, right, yeah,
I think we need to focus on.
Yeah.
And communicate what the
Yeah.
site's going to be, and the proof of this is the data. The EPA is doing what they said they're going, there's no
Yeah,
reason
yeah.
not to think that the site isn't going to be.
Yeah.
Possibly, it's residential cleanup.
Yeah.
Theoretically, it can be used for anything, so there are terms, David, that maybe you can help with at various points, there were
There's
residential standards. Radioactivity versus toxicity. Background contamination, because they're cleaning up. And the fact that there's what risk means, there's no zero risk. The levels, chemical levels on the site are gonna be very similar to what they are. Or even better than they are
Right.
in the surrounding area, so this context. Gotta keep thinking about the context for a lot of different things, context for contamination, the context for the holding basin. The context is really important in the communication. I don't know how the best way to communicate, but I do think David makes a point. One element is sort of the one-on-ones, I'll call the ambassador program. Another element is a more public communication. And maybe that goes piggyback with the EPA public meetings, rather than having a public meeting on.
this can be a difficult communication. I mean, you can say all these words to people and they'll look at you and they'll say, yes, but it's radioactive.
Well, this is,
And I find it's useful to
Yeah.
convince them that they live in a natural radioactive background
well, yeah,
And
yes
that-
and no.
and that this cleanup is going to nothing will be there that's greater than that background.
Well, I think
That's actually been proven to be counterproductive. That rational argument is counterproductive.
I disagree with you there.
Well, I can cite you lots of literature from the risk communication field that I used to teach at Harvard. You probably have had conversations with people that trust you and are impressed with you and that argument. The problem being that this form of radiation, which they perceive to be there, which isn't even there as a health risk, is imposed on them rather than voluntary, which is the nature of the natural environment. This is not like eating a banana. This is imposed on you. This is not familiar. We are familiar with the sun. We're familiar with radon. There are psychological characteristics that make this radioactivity factually similar, though it may be, emotionally significantly different. And trying to argue to people they should be rational, the implicit argument that you're suggesting, can be, particularly with the deeply concerned, can be taken as you're treating me disrespectfully and be counterproductive. And there's actually quite a bit of research on that.
Right, scientifically, I'm with you. I've written a lot of papers that talk about background, but David's right. On the communication part, it kind of falls flat.
Except that
Almost sounds like an excuse.
you're talking about changing the nature of all the communication this committee does to reach out to a few people who are emotional about it.
Well, that's part of it.
And that, I think, dilutes our credibility with all of those people who are rational about it. So we need to balance that back and forth,
No,
I think.
you're absolutely right. I don't think that one component is to reach out to people who might be concerned, but like this, a larger public and committees that could be. So, Melanie's on the Board of Health should be fully knowledgeable and an ally in this. The Housing Committee should be on board whether they want to do housing or not. The Recreation Department should be on board whether they want to do recreation or not. And, so I think, spreading the word amongst knowledgeable people is also a good thing. So when it comes up in conversation, look, 2229 is out there because it's the land use group. When we talk about it's MCI Concord, 2229, Peabody School, over and over and over, it's out there. So the town knows that we're thinking about that.
So,
the more that we can talk about it, the more that more people can talk about it rationally. So kind of spreading the word.
but
Yeah.
I was,
I think, I understand what you're saying, but likewise, it's not like we're misstating facts. I think, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, it's depending on which group you're talking to is what you focus on.
That's exactly and the language that you use and the nature of the relationship. And our recommendations to the select board specified that there are different audiences, as Pam just pointed out, there are multiple audiences. Each one needs to be understood and approached uniquely, given their nature, their concerns. By the way, you notice how we're kind of bandying around a whole bunch of ideas. One of the recommendations that we made to the select board or to the town was that this be coordinated. We're throwing a whole bunch of ideas on the table. There is no risk communication plan here. There is no, we're going to do the visits. We're going to reach out to this audience with these ambassadors. All these ideas are very good ideas. They're all fine ideas, but they're very ad hoc. Pam makes a good point, which is we don't want one part of what one group is doing to undercut the work that another group is doing. So there needs to be some, ultimately when, and I think it may be premature for an overall risk communication outreach program at this low level of concern generally, but ultimately when there is one, it needs to have some coordination. It needs to have some consistent thinking through all the various steps in the language, because you wouldn't use the same language with some groups you'd use with others. You could use the rational language with lots of people. You wouldn't use it with the people who are, I don't say this disrespectfully, but seeing this through their own psychologically emotional lenses.
So we are having this is a brainstorming discussion, which is good, but you're right. My ask of this committee is to develop a plan that has the components, the coordinated components that can execute over the next couple of years. That just to probably spend the next 3 to 6 months. There's no urgency. You're coming up with a plan that has the multiple elements that are stitched together.
I think having site visits is very good.
Very good.
But I heard something here today that I think would be a mistake, and that was requiring some sort of protective clothing on a site visit.
No.
There is going to be a holding basin cleanup that's going to have an exclusion zone where people are not going to be allowed in and they're going to have.
Okay.
And once that becomes visible, that may be a detriment to our, the fact that they're going to wear dosimeters when they do that. Even if we're saying.
We don't know what they're gonna do. We need to get more information. That's for sure.
Right now, people can walk all over the site.
Yeah.
Safely.
But they're gonna be digging up the stuff from below.
Have an ongoing sort of, there's a subgroup coming up with a plan that David, right, that stitches together these, I'll call them brilliant brainstorming, you call them ad hoc, into a plan. I wouldn't, the thing that's changed since 2024 is that 2229 Main Street is now part of the conversation of land that's available for use, and there's an opportunity there. So, whether it's 46 acres or whether it's 20 developable, that, there's an opportunity for lots of needs to be met in town. And I think more people are getting on board with that, at least theoretically. So that's changed a little bit. The other thing that's changed a little bit, I'll call the cell tower controversy. Early on, and David, you're right in the middle of it. The health risk of cell towers it trumped any other safety issues, being able to communicate that pendulum has swung completely now, where the risk of not having cell towers, for safety and communication, it greatly outweighs the theoretical or hypothetical or whatever you call the health risk. So I think that pendulum swung a little bit on that. So it's one example where I think the pendulum may be swinging a little bit on the side where there's more wind behind the sails and communication than maybe there would have been 5 years ago when it was really a nasty place.
So
I would ask you all to do two things, if I may. in the report that the 2229 Advisory Committee made, there's an appendix that I and Pam and others helped write that specifically goes through all of what we've just been discussing, risk communication.
It's actually chapter 13.
Yeah, it's like 5 pages, 3 pages, something. It was a very quick read. I would ask
Right.
you all to be familiar with it. If it turns out that this committee chooses to go ahead with taking the responsibility for this, and that's our call jointly, please be familiar with that. Second, I would ask that we start to coordinate. So we hear from people about this site because we're on this group, we're involved in this stuff, Paul especially, right? Let's collect a list of those names. Who are they? That's an audience. That's information gathering. Not everybody comes to public meetings. We talked about this, right? The public meetings that are right on the cusp of making a decision about something get heavily attended. And 2229 hasn't been that quite so far. We've had 50, 60 people. There are probably more people who are concerned who would come to the big meeting. Prior to that, though, we can identify the people who are more deeply concerned, who have been speaking to us. Let's do some coordinating gathering of their names and talk amongst ourselves about how to reach out to those people and have these, conversations at over coffee with, what are your concerns? Let's just talk about it. We don't have to do it in a big group. We don't have to do it in a big public meeting, but we have to identify the audiences, and each of us are information gatherers for who those audiences might be. So those were the two things that I think could move each of us forward. I have to reread the section myself. I did before this meeting this morning.
Yeah, as long as that specific list is broad enough,
It's just a starting place, Paul. It's only just a starting place.
Yeah, I understand, there always gonna be a vocal minority. They're important, they have concerns, whether it's 6 people, 10 people, or 20 people. That will be hard convincing, but I think we collectively need to convince the community.
That's correct.
Community on this. And so I'm not saying ignore the vocal minority. I think they're important, but focus on the larger community as well and the influencers there. And I come back to the housing community, whether or not there's housing on that site. And there's larger discussions because there's so much housing in the area right now. There's a 40B residence at Thoreau right around the corner. There's the Acton gigantic development going on there. There's a sentiment in West Concord that there's just too much housing, too much traffic. So you may get pushback from housing, a larger housing thing, not a small PRD, not a small development, a large house, but still having the housing community understand that the site could be used safely. You may not want to do it, but it could. I think that would go a long way because that you can just see the sensitivity. The broader sensitivity would be people living on the site. And so I think the housing community is a really, however we define that, and the number of committees would be a good part of the outreach. So I know it's one of the.
It'd be a good thing to talk. It'd be a good thing to talk to Rich, who was on the advisory committee, who
Absolutely.
from the housing world. But you make a very good point that's worth reiterating, that it's the entire community that we have to reach ultimately. But we have to think strategically about who's going to be influencing that larger community and how they will, and therefore how we will influence those segments. If you want, I sometimes use the metaphor, we used to use this with clients, of a dartboard. So the bright red dot in the middle are the deeply concerned. But then there are rings of progressively less concerns that form the big circle that we do want to influence. So it becomes a strategic question of how much emphasis we want to place on which ring. And we have a wonderful quiet time to do that, that Paul's brought to our attention. I do think that, and the cell phone thing was an example of this, a small group of influencers influenced the entire town to put in place a zoning law that was ridiculous. On the facts, was ridiculous. But it was the small group of influencers that did that. And it was the fear of radiation that drove them, they've said.
Yeah.
So that bright red dot is an important part of the overall picture.
So I would like to present an idea, and I would like to get through it all before we talk about each part of it. One thing is, I'd like to have us have a plan for how the committee is going to work on this in the next year. So that we add risk communication as one of our standard things in our discussion of, in our agenda. So that's always there. I would like us to be selecting a few groups to organize for tours, and tours being a way to reach out to people and figure out those names of who's nervous and who's not. And suggested so far has been developers, housing people, housing committees, and I would like to add the League of Women Voters to that, because I think getting on their radar for getting them to help with our risk communication is a valuable thing, as far as the environmental groups are concerned. The environmental groups have been worried about a lot of other little things like, you know, rat traps and cell towers and other things. And, you know, we may need to see about that. But I'm talking about just for the next year, with the idea that the longer term risk communication happens and it starts happening in a year, that this is the year of developing our communities for risk communication. The other big opportunity for risk communication in the next year is, I think it's time that we get some environment, like birders or people that, we need somebody documenting what goes on in the yearly cycle of the bog.
It's Gary Clayton.
Okay.
Gary Clayton has been on the site multiple times as a fan of at least developing the natural resource side of it. You know, Gary lives right there at Black Birch and
Lives right next to them and used to be the president of the Mass Audubon Society.
yeah, and I think he'd be an ally. He's very
But that's for the potential of what the bog would be as a community, getting people doing that, maybe leading a few birder things. Again, I think that would be helpful to do before the holding basin zone, exclusion zone is created, because right now you really can walk anywhere. It's only when they start digging up stuff from 90 feet below that you have the concern again of the kind of exposure for anybody, you know, and that's only for workers. But seeing that line may make a difference as far as, but having a yearly cycle in pictures and of opportunities for what to do recreationally around the bog is a very valuable.
yeah, he raised an interesting point. And of course, the Delia National Resource Commission could be it.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has ever done, so Gary Clayton has written a report on Powder Mill Woods, the trees and the ecology of Powder, but I don't think anybody's ever written anything on the I don't know, the ecology of the habit of the bog.
There have been two things that are worth mentioning. First was Rich, I always forget his name, the ecologist from Harvard. Help me, guys.
Rick Foreman.
Yeah, Richard Foreman. Wonderful guy.
He just wrote a book. I haven't looked, the book is dense. I wonder if the
And
bog
his
is in
book
there.
took the list of chemicals of concern at the site from a document and basically described how hazardous they were for our site, because he wasn't really talking about.
He wrote,
He's challenging in some ways.
I've had several conversations with him. He's a friend. We talked about co-writing another book.
Okay.
He had written a paper, and the advisory committee members may recall this, that called this one of the most hazardous sites in New England.
Mm-hmm.
And I respectfully responded to him, and we had some back and forth with that. And he tempered that language. I don't know what he's published subsequent to that, but that paper specifically about this site, you're talking about what's been published about this site, grossly overcharacterized the risk.
Yeah.
And I have talked to him with information that has helped assuage a lot of those acute concerns, or at least so I thought.
When I was talking about him writing with that book, though, he would be basically saying, oh, that sounds interesting, but here's what it says in the document, and I'd rather quote that.
Well,
So I don't know whether we've developed that
But
very well.
Richard wrote, whatever paper he wrote, this was the site as it was. And there's no denying this site was very risky. the question is, what's
now?
what the site's going to be?
Precisely, and
that's
that's the conversation I had with him.
Yeah.
And I believe that I can continue to have the conversation with him. You asked specifically, Paul, what had been written about the site ecologically. That was one thing. He used to lead student groups out there and use this as a, oh my God, kind of site. He would be a great spokesperson for what the site now has been turned into. So that's one option. The other question about the environmentalists' concern is twice did you, Paul, or somebody else, Pam, you came to the conservation coffee that Delia has monthly with 40 or 50 people who are self-identified environmentalists with various specific concerns, save the bees, don't use pesticides, replant, don't rake up your leaves. The people who come to the conservation coffee have a variety of concerns, but they're all around environmentalism. And twice I've gone myself, and Pam was at one, and invited them to express their concerns. Ask them to. Ask them if they're interested in coming to tour. I'm blanking on the name, but there's a woman who is a member of the League of Women Voters who is particularly an adamant. She goes to First Parish. She's a friend of mine.
Dottie,
I'm sorry?
the Dottie, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
one of the Janets probably.
Yeah. There you go. Right. And I invited her to come to the site with me. Let's just go visit it. Let's just go talk. So this is information that's important. It's information because it tells us who the audiences are. It's information that tells us how robust the concern is. It's easy to state, and sometimes just stating it is waving your group affiliation flag more than actually, I'm going to champion town action on this level of concern. But we've gone to those environmental meetings and had minimal response. Interestingly, surprisingly, even from her.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good collection of important stakeholders. So
Yes,
focusing part of the plan on those folks, they get together once a month.
we
Yeah,
could
just
go.
some-
We could ask Delia. This
Right.
committee could ask Delia for time to make a presentation at that group.
Sure.
Let me just summarize my ask, and I think you started on coming up with a plan. There's no urgency on this, but this is kind of a slow and steady thing over the next couple of years to reach the various people with the information, relevant information of what the site's going to be, putting the various things in context. Because it's a complicated story.
So again, the
Recommendations.
plan
The recommendations that we made with Pam and Paul and the advisory committee to the select board / town is a wonderful starting point for all of us to think about what such a plan might include. So I ask you to check that out if you guys can, please.
And Pam, this report is on the website?
It is, the
Yeah,
whole
okay.
report is on the website, yeah.
Okay.
There's, if you go to the previous, there's another committee that's got 2229 in its name. And if you, no, actually, NMI Reuse Committee, the NMI Reuse Committee is
The NMI Reuse Committee, which that's an interesting report, but that's in the section on
Is that in?
previous committees.
Okay.
This
Okay.
committee is still on the active committee, right under you guys.
Right.
There are 22229 things. One is this committee and one's.
You guys are above.
Right.
So on there.
Do we want to talk to someone about putting links to these reports on this committee's?
Yeah, we'll look at what
You're gonna do that?
We'll have a discussion with a subgroup of this that's smaller than open meeting things, so we can move quickly and try to get a couple of those links, but yeah, so. And then we can raise it next meeting on, is there any issues with what we did or did not do?
Before I forget the trend on the data, I think as chair, you should contact Megan Zamudo.
Yeah,
And ask Megan Zamudo to ask or consultant Rue.
Yeah.
For the electronic version of the existing data, because the PDF is on the site, but so, you know.
I will ask Megan, so.
And then Karen, you know, to update on additional, because I think the data here are going to be our friend. You know, as the thing, it's proof positive that, on the question of whether EPA is meeting their commitments, which is part of the risk communication.
Right, yeah.
It's not all of that. I think it's an important component.
And your comment about the schedule, likewise, if we can get what is the current schedule? And I mean, we talk about, your comment about, well, by turnover type stuff. Based on what the EPA is currently doing, what is their thought process on, I mean, there's gonna be ongoing, I know, well stuff going on you know.
So just, having it as sort of standing topic here, we're coming up with a plan that you can present to the select board. As this is, you know, there was a recommendation to the select board to come up with this plan. You guys are doing it maybe in the spring.
Okay.
One of the meetings.
I was thinking we work on that after the holding basins gets up and going, that in the meantime, our job is to get groups out on the site and get contacts so that there's information about it.
Yeah.
Get ourselves established with the groups that will care, and get our list of people that are our private contacts that we want to encourage who have issues, and get the use of the bog as recreation highlighted, so that we've got that in people's minds when we're starting to, so that we can develop a risk communication plan once we have our group. That's sort of the in-between before we come up with the full risk communication plan, is to get these things started. Or am I wrong, David? Or do you think I'm jumping the gun?
Well, no, it's just a little bit out of order, but they're all components of exactly the same thing. But part of the plan, the plan precedes everything.
Mhm.
Plan includes identifying these audiences. The plan includes talking to the bridge. The plan includes planning the visits. The plan includes the timing. The plan includes accessing the data. The plan is where you start thinking conceptually, and then all of these things are elements in it, but you've hit the elements, and it's, I don't think that we need to wait until the holding basin work itself is underway, although that will be a wonderful peg or hard world, real world development that is A, in our favor, and B, will raise concern. It'll get the bridge there. They'll talk to Kara. They'll work out some access to take pictures, you know, cranes and doing whatever the hell they're doing. It's actually visually pretty interesting. That'll be a good touchstone moment to raise attention, but we could start on some of the other elements first. But the initial step is conceptualizing what we're going to be doing, the plan. So I would suggest as a first step, we just all reread that set of steps that Pam and I and Paul and others came up with for the select board, chapter 13 in that report that's online, as a first step. And the second step I would specifically ask is for all of us to, and I'd be happy, or I would take on the responsibility of making a list of who the people are who have the deepest concerns, so that we can start to coordinate where that information is, as opposed to apocryphally, each of us say, hey, I talked to somebody the other day. Who's the guy at the DPW you talked to, Pam? Who's the person, Paul, who came to you at the select board? So to coordinate that, if you would all just contact me whenever you want, hey, I talked to somebody and blah, blah, blah. And then we can factor in the planning what to do about that.
Last thing we recommend is that when we do that, is when you guys do that as individuals or a group, that you're all on the same page. We're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not saying you have a script, but this is, you need talking points here.
Yeah.
And the factual, you know, honest talking points. So
consistency is going to be
important. So, you know,
you will find a number of those talking points in what we recommended to the town.
Yep, probably.
There were a number of specific suggestions of messages. One of them, for example, is radioactivity. It's toxicity, not radioactivity. One of them is the clean soil replacement means that the soil on this site is probably cleaner than most of the property in Concord.
Yeah,
Messages like that are in that.
well, I'd start with a big message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
EPA spending $300 million to clean
Yeah.
up the site to residential standards, which means that anything can be done there. And then you go down,
It's the
yes,
best answer.
yeah, and you drill down into you gotta start with. Anyway, I think the messaging is really important here, because there are, you know, we're talking about 20 different ad hoc things here, right? So I think
Yeah.
you need to package those together into a message.
So I,
Anyway,
I want to point out that this committee has always, one of the purposes of this committee has been to keep an eye on the data and make sure that things are happening that are to the benefit of Concord people. We're here to speak for Mary Weinberg, to speak for the people who are concerned, and to say, hey, this is part of our job as, yes, we're volunteers, we're not getting paid for it, but because we care about our community, we're here for you. That's why we're going to the trouble to make sure that this is right, because we're trying to address your concerns. We want to hear what you have to say about this so that we can make sure that we're holding EPA's feet to the fire, that we're holding the contractor's feet to the fire.
Which
I think that
which
that's a
means
valuable thing, that we are
it's a-
their
it's-
champions.
It's a terrifically valuable thing, Pam. And as I mentioned in the advisory committee recommendations, this committee, because it's been representing the public's concerns, has a foundation of trust. That
well, there's a lot, I remember
it's
this one slide I had.
important resource.
Sorry, one of my presentations has the long history of town involvement through all the different committees. This is the longest standing committee, but you know, Crew's involvement early on before then this committee, then the reuse committee, then the advisory committee. So the citizens have had their eyes on this site for a while. That's another township comfort in that, to your point. But you're the last committee standing.
But we're not trying to reach out to these people to convince them of something. We are trying to reach out to these people to let them know that we are working to make sure that their concerns are addressed.
We're answering
That this
questions.
really is.
And give them the information and the context, and they,
Yeah.
you know, you're right, you may not be able to convince anybody.
Yeah.
Or somebody will say, yeah, I believe all that, but I'm still never gonna set foot on that property. That's fine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's fine.
All you can do.
It's an
But that
individual-
doesn't mean we're not listening to everything they said and making sure that everything they said is
We're not saying
addressed.
we're not going to, so,
Yeah.
yeah, so.
Yeah.
You know,
Great discussion, guys.
do you have another comment? Or
I do.
Yeah. So. I think. So we can lock up the computer and their stuff upstairs so they can leave too. If there's nothing else. No, we had no guests. Hopefully they weren't sitting there. We missed them getting on, but. Thank you all. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for November 21st. I've. Based on our conversation today, I think we likely have a meeting. Likewise, we'll officially report out whatever we hear from Kara. So I don't know length of that meeting, whatever. So,
Well, you were going to,
yeah, I'm gonna reach out to
you're
Kara.
gonna just, we'll get the links to
Yeah.
the reuse committee stuff up, and you're gonna contact Megan about getting the
Data.
real electronic data, and,
I'm reaching out to Kara.
I will reach out to Gary Clayton.
Okay. Okay,
The other thing, just last thing to keep in mind, there's still an NRD settlement. In the, you know, it's part of CERCLA's natural resource damage assessment, separate from cleanup. There's still, and it's been being negotiated for a long time, and I've been asking the lawyers, and they said, we can't say anything. At some point, there's gonna be a settlement, and that settlement will lead to a request for projects from this town and other towns for projects to spend that money
okay,
for restoration of natural resources. What that shape is, so I'm tracking that because I've done NRD professionally for a long time. It's not done yet, I just keep that, it's kind
Yeah,
of
okay.
peripheral to what you're doing, but at some
Okay.
point,
Yeah.
there's gonna be a settlement. Mass DEP is gonna reach out to various towns and ask for projects to restore it. What that could be anything at the site that enhances natural resources.
Okay.
It could certainly be trail development,
Could be a viewing platform.
viewing
for the bog.
platform, right,
Yeah.
that's of the bog, and that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If that's it, I'd like to adjourn the meeting second.
Second.
Okay. Thank you all.